Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. This is Courtney, the Marketing Coordinator here at AIM. Today's webinar will be recorded and later posted on our website. This does mean that all attendees will be muted so that we can get a quality recording. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box and we'll try to answer them throughout the presentation. But if we're unable to get to all the questions, we'll have a member of our marketing team reach out to you individually to make sure we get those answered. Our newest agent resource, the 2-Minute Minute, is in full swing. Our marketing team is bringing you quick hit ways to talk to more prospects, write more business, and grow your agency. We're posting new videos every Monday and Wednesday, so check out our social media pages, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube to see what you might have missed. Some episodes even reference exclusive offers that you're going to want to check out. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Mike so that we can get started. Go ahead and take it away, Mike.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. Appreciate it. As always, Courtney does a great job of taking care of all the detail behind the scenes stuff that lets us put these things on smoothly. So a lot of appreciation there. Want to say thanks in advance to Stephen Alloy. Stephen's part of the advanced markets team at Mutual of Omaha. He's been gracious enough to join us a couple different times as we talk about that, and he's able to present a unique internal perspective, let's call it, carrier perspective. And so he's back once again, and out there somewhere hiding in a corner is Amanda Blackburn, and she is our product manager for the Mutual Long-Term Care product. She takes care of making sure we have the things that we need, materials and such, through the different avenues internally to handle that. So she's here with us as well. So, and we do appreciate all of you making your time available to join us. We know that you got a lot of things going on and that you're busy. I'm quite certain that what we've got here over the next 40 minutes or so will be beneficial for you, help you kind of get set moving forward. And so I'm going to take just a couple minutes here with a brief Washington recap for folks, just so folks know kind of where that's at. And then we will dive into this kind of a status update with regard to California. Got some relatively new stuff on that, some stuff we know, some stuff we don't know, et cetera. And along the way, Steve's got some very interesting perspectives on a lot of the different pieces. So Washington, all right, well, as you may or may not know, the WA Cares Fund and the LTC payroll tax in Washington is underway. It is being collected, has been collected since, depending on payroll cycles and such, since the beginning of the month. And for those who were convinced that this was going to be the beginning of the end, Mount St. Helens did not explode again. The world hasn't come to an end, and the Good Ferry legislation destroyer has not swooped into Washington and repealed that legislation. Okay, so we now have proof of concept, which was the legislation that they drafted, et cetera, and now we've got proof of execution. Okay, they put it into place despite some outcry, and there's always going to be outcry. Despite some outcry, they started to collect the tax, and things haven't come to a screeching halt here. And Steve's going to talk a little bit about kind of that, and he's going to also talk about what we call the Washington wait and how that affects, or how we think it's going to affect the rest of the market. So Washington's going forward. We believe that's going to set the stage for other states going forward. And Steve, I know you've got some interesting thoughts on that, so why don't you go ahead and jump in with that, and then we'll get rolling.
Well, thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody. It's always good to join you on these calls, and because I think it's fun to talk with you, but I think this is also an important topic as well. And you mentioned that the payroll tax has started to be collected in Washington, and I think that to the extent that that goes on without Mount St. Helens erupting or some disaster happening, I think a lot of states are watching that very closely to see what steps they're going to take next. I think in a couple of the states we're going to talk about, I think we know, we know maybe a little bit more about them, but a lot of the states that really haven't put forward a new proposal, at least this legislative session, haven't put forward a new proposal, I think are watching Washington to say, look, let's see how this goes. And if it goes without major glitches, then I think that's going to make them more likely to step forward. So that's kind of that Washington wake that you're talking about is, I think, quite a few states, two of the prominent ones that we're going to talk about are in this boat to some extent, but I think a whole lot of states behind them, kind of the next wave of states are really watching Washington. And as this progresses, they're going to be more likely to step forward with their own proposals as well.
Yes. And one of the things that has complicated the Washington situation has been the gentleman who is the director of, and that may be the actual unofficial title as opposed to the real one, who is the director of the WaCares Fund. And this is a gentleman named Ben Vegti, and he so far has established a track record of definitely over-promising and under-delivering, making some statements that I think, if the truth be told, has carriers, either their eyes are spinning or they're rolling back in their head with regard to the relationship between that program in Washington, which is not an insurance program by definition, and how the insurance market in the long-term care market, he's basically set forth that they should alter products, create new products, submit new products for approval that will work as a quote-unquote supplemental product for what Washington has put into place. And that creates a bunch of, when you really get down into the weeds, into the serious insurance nerd talk, that creates a lot of issues based on how the contract language exists for the products that are available in the, I guess you would call it, the long-term care mainstream. And there's some concern that other states are listening to the things that he's saying and beginning to pattern some of their conversations and such after his idea, which is that what Washington has should be at the forefront, and then everything else that exists and all the things that we do within this marketplace would then be supplemental. And Steve, you and I had kind of a pretty good chuckle when we were talking last week about this whole idea that Mutual of Omaha's long-term care product, which has been the dominant brokerage product for almost 10 years now, that this guy sort of wants to try to wish it into a supplemental position to what he's got going on. Talk about how difficult that makes it for what the other states are trying to do and what the market's trying to do to support initiatives like Washington's.
Well, that's a great point. I remember we were at that same conference, and I just about dropped my pen when I heard that suddenly all us carriers were supplemental. I thought, well, I'm not sure that's how the carriers see it, but I think, though, to some extent, I think carriers, not that we're saying that we are going to be supplemental, but I think carriers are starting to think about, well, if this happens in multiple states, do we design a product that does supplement this? I mean, we're certainly not going to give up on the primary product, which is really the kind of the good solution, the way out of a lot of this for a lot of the people that can do that, can get the coverage and can maintain it. But I think a lot of the carriers are starting to think that if this starts to happen in multiple states and the design's basically similar, I wouldn't be surprised if down the road there are some products that are designed to supplement this. Once this is gone, this will kick in, like a longer elimination period or more limited benefits, some sort of design around that. So yeah, I mean, I think we're not really supplemental, but I think to the extent that this is going to go in force for perhaps a lot of people, we and others may start to design products around it.
Yeah, I think probably his terminology supplemental doesn't work, but the terminology that the products are going to work together, that there's a possibility that kind of thing can happen, and also streamline it, because I think in a lot of cases, and we saw this in Washington, the carriers aren't big fans of the idea that people are buying really base coverages solely to get out from underneath the tax. But we don't have to like it. But the truth of the matter is that the consumer is king. And if carrier A doesn't want to do it, carrier C will do it. And
Right.
when you step back and you look at what happened in Washington and the amount of business that was written there, it's really difficult to find a situation where you look at a large chunk of people who bought long-term care at the age of 45, who are young and relatively healthy and who are going to pay those premiums, you know, for the next 25 or 30 years. It's really difficult to see a downside to how that plays out. So it's be interesting to see what the experience is as we move forward. So, okay, that's kind of the Washington recap. I don't see anybody jumping up and down, waving their arms or anything. So we're going to move along and start talking about the two principal other states that are bubbling up, as it were, specifically California, New York. And I do want to kind of set the ground rules going forward, is that we're not going to get into the politics piece of this, because that's not what we do. Okay, the simple truth is that the biggest line item in Medicaid spending for any state is in conjunction with long-term care type benefits. And the only way that some of these states, perhaps all of the states, are going to be able to stave off insolvency is going to be coming up with some way to force people, let's be honest, that's what's happening here, because they haven't responded to less strident means, but to force people to purchase private long-term care to avoid having to pay a tax. And in Washington, having 500,000 people in that private insurance lane means that group of 500,000 people has to exhaust that benefit that they purchased from one of the carriers who was in the game in Washington. That's got to be exhausted before they're eligible to get into Medicaid proper. Okay, so now California got a couple of things that I want to give everybody the opportunity to look at. One of them is it's the handiwork of there was a committee that was put together a couple of years ago. The governor commissioned it, and this group of folks, both directly in the long-term care industry and in the surrounding and overlapping areas and disciplines, if you will, that pertain to this, they put this together, and what they came up with was these 5 proposals. Okay, and as you can see here, and I can't make it much, I can make it a little bit bigger, but not too much bigger. There you go. All right, what you can see here is that it ranges from more or less a copycat of Washington, even a skinny down copycat of Washington, all the way up to what we would consider to be a fairly robust long-term care benefit at $6,000 a month out of a pool of $144,000. One of the interesting things, but the taxpayers and the beneficiaries, if you will like this, is that 4 of the 5 of these have no elimination period built into them. They're all individual coverage, which is good. Some offer some of the enhanced stuff with shared benefit pools and things like this. Okay, so, and there's actually a bunch of different stuff here. There's a second page that has eligibility and enrollment and financing and different things like that. It's important to note 2 things, okay? There hasn't been a selection, and we're going to look at a timeline here in a minute. There hasn't been a selection made by the legislature as to which of these they are going to grab onto and ride going forward. Because there hasn't been that selection, there's also not been a determination made as to what benefit levels will be satisfactory to allow for opting out, which was what happened in Washington in gigantic numbers. So it's a little bit of a predicament, and further complicating that predicament is that what they are eyeballing now is sort of a look back shutout or closeout, if you want to call it that, in that if they were to pass the legislation in 24, for example, that legislation would be worded in such a way that it would say, if you didn't have your policy by the end of 23, you can't opt out. Okay, and that's important to note, because that means, and we were talking about this concept a lot at the big long-term care meeting. It was back in Denver in in the middle of March, and a lot of the luminaries within the market were there. The carriers were all there. A lot of the big names that have been around the industry for a long time, everybody was there, and it was the subject of of a lot of conversation. But what people were talking about pretty consistently there was that we were in the runway or on the runway at that point in time, and the time frame that was going to be available for you folks out there in the audience, the agents, that time frame was active now, and that there was a very strong possibility that window for that was going to close at the end of this year, depending on, and you'll see the timeline in a minute, depending on what action they take and how they construct this legislation. Okay, so the simple truth seems to be right now, based on what we see and kind of reading the tea leaves, is now is the time that agents should be talking to their clients and prospects, letting them know this is coming, because it is coming, and that they have the opportunity now to have a little bit more rational and reasoned conversation and not be in a hurry. And the agents have the opportunity to really explore what long-term care is about and what it can mean. And when you and I were talking about this before, Stephen, kind of in conjunction with that golden age of long-term care thing, you were really excited at the idea that we've got this time now, and that additional time that we've got now without so much pressure is really actually beneficial.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think in a lot of ways, this is it may not look like it, but in a lot of ways, I think there's actually a gift to long-term care sales, because we've got a time frame. We don't really know how long, but we've got a time frame where it's not panicked. It's not like you've got 90 days to do this or whatever, but we've got sort of a relaxed time frame, but not real relaxed. It's probably this year, maybe next year. It's not real long, but it's a time where we can get the idea in front of customers and do it the right way, rather than just throw something up that's going to get an exemption, but really is only slightly better than what the state's offering. It's time to get a really good plan in place, and to get the right coverage in place. Hopefully we'll also get you an exemption as well, but we'll also give you the right coverage. So I think it's a great opportunity, and it's kind of at the carriers, it's always a little kind of a balance. I mean, we're always told, hey, don't panic sell, don't, it's not like the house is on fire. It's like, no, the house isn't on fire, but I don't think it's panic selling to say, that it might have to be in place in this year if they pass this next year. I mean, at least the way it stands in a couple of these states, that's not panic selling. That's just reporting. That is just actually what's happening. So, I think the sooner you get this idea in front of clients, the better. That's
what we've been saying, from your lips to God's ears, I guess.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And it's important
that you haven't heard from me already, but this,
right.
Just hear it from another source maybe. But yeah, I think now is the time. Yes.
Right. And New York is going to end up being really, really similar to California in a lot of ways, because they're also looking at this look back shutout concept as well. So agents, and I know there's some folks on the call that are New York based or have ties to New York. Same thing there. Okay, we don't have a lot of detailed information, but we don't need detailed information to be successful. Okay.
Right.
California has 16. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I know New York's proposal, their previous proposal, which might come back the same, was exactly as you described. It was like, hey, whatever year, if you didn't have it in place by January 1st of whatever year the bill's passed, no exemption. So, if they pass that next year, that would be, you have to get it in place this year.
There you go.
They may change that, but if that comes back as is, or if California does something similar, this year, this is the time.
Well, and if they change it, that's a good point. If they change it, the people that took action now aren't affected negatively. They actually had the luxury of having a more reasoned conversation. As I said before, California has rough numbers 16 million W-2 employees. Washington had 4 million W-2 employees. So you don't have to have a calculator to do the math on that. They're, you know, and again, this probably causes carrier folks' hair to curl, but the reality is there's going to be capacity issues.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Selling now keeps people out of capacity issues, and it isn't just the obvious capacity pieces, and those are you've got electronic systems that the carriers all use now for applications, and you know, but at some level along the way, it still has to be handled by people, and they can handle a finite amount of items in an hour or in a day of work. And so you got that piece. Another thing that folks don't think about, and I know this doesn't apply to any of the agents we have on the call, but one of Murphy's laws of insurance is that agents procrastinate. And so if agents are procrastinating now and waiting until quite late or even into the next year to try to pull this off, that creates issues with licensing, in the internal piece with licensing and approvals and background checks and compliance and continuing education verification. All those things have to happen. It's a relatively leisurely time right now that's going to go away. Okay. And so another reason to point out, you're standing in the middle of the runway, and we know it's kind of a mixed bag with this. All right. But you're going to end up there sooner or later. That's why we keep talking about this, and we keep stressing this idea that doing something now is a much better way to go than waiting. And like Stephen said, keeping yourself actively positioned outside of this concept of panic selling, for lack of a better way to put it.
Oh yeah. Well, and Mike, you make a great point that with 25% of the W-2 employees that California has, state of Washington shut down the industry. I mean, everybody was shut down. Now, I've talked to a lot of our underwriters. I think in part, we didn't know what to expect because this hadn't happened. Nobody had done this yet, right? Well, now Washington's done it. They say they know a little more. And as you mentioned, they are speeding up their overall underwriting process. So, they're saying, well, we think we can handle it, but 4 times. And then if New York goes at the same time, wow, I don't know. That's a lot. That's an awful lot.
Sure. And it's really good to point out that the carriers, I mean, AIM, we've been in this business for 40 years. Mutual of Omaha has been doing long-term care for a long time. Some of the hybrid carriers have been doing it for a long time, but there is still some part of a learning curve with this, because you literally have to go from what we would categorize as standard staffing to like heavy flow or heavy traffic staffing, but you got to get people up and running fast to do it, because budgets still have to be respected and things like this. And I know that there was some concern in Washington as it sort of was looming, if you will, the position that we're talking about now in California, because nobody was talking about it. Unlike California, where it's very public and they have made an active effort to be transparent, the opposite was the case in Washington. So even as far into 2021 as March, I'm not sure anybody really thought something was going to happen. And then all of a sudden, spontaneously on April 1st, it just exploded.
Yeah.
It absolutely exploded.
Yeah, like you say, it's I think a lot of people were saying, well, that won't pass because it hadn't happened yet. Well, now it's happened, and so I think when that scenario happens in other states, I think a lot of people, if they say, well, that won't pass, like, well, yeah, it probably will, because I think a lot of them are, like you mentioned, a lot of them are looking at their budgets. Biggest line item in a lot of the budgets is Medicaid. The biggest part of Medicaid is, the long-term care piece. So, states that may not want to do it are looking at doing it.
Yeah, and one of the pieces that this kind of gets into under the heading of civics nerd talk, but one of the things that folks lose sight of is the states like California and New York the legislation, the running of the state is a year-round business. If you're a state legislator in California, you're actively involved in that all the time. And so their legislature is in session now. You know, they take some breaks and such, but they're basically doing the business of their business all year round. Okay, same thing with New York. In Washington, the legislature's in session for about 2.5 months. All right, and once they finish, they're done. And so when something happens during that small time frame, it doesn't get changed down the road. Okay, and California is a different beast. So anyway, so we got these charts, and you can find this online. It's not like we have access to super secret information. The real key piece to it is what's up here in these sections here, and what it is that they arrive at. They're going to arrive at some form that's going to be. It's intended to be. It's going to be structured to look more comprehensive. Washington was just sort of, okay, here's a pile of cash. We'll throw the pile of cash at you and let you deal with whatever you need to deal with. But it was really truly pointed towards home care. As you can see here, facility care is mentioned prominently. In several of these, there's emphasis on community-based services and things like that. But it's designed to put together something that's going to be worthwhile. We know California, because I hear about this every time I talk to an agent, California is a state that's heavily taxed. And it's worth noting, I'm not going to disclose destination or location, but Stephen's actually in California today. He's working remotely, and he's in the nice sunny part of the state down there, and kind of enjoying all of the things that come with that. A little aside there, but this committee has worked hard to try to put something together that doesn't just look like it's kind of a toss-off, which is what you had in Washington. So let's take a look here at this timeline, okay? And this is off of a report that we pulled from somebody else, all right? And you can see a number of key things here. Number one, the legislature convenes first week of January to start their session, all right? Now, a key date in all of this, and it'll be very similar next year, is mid-February is the last day for 2024 bills to be introduced into the legislature, okay? So it could still conceivably happen this year, but for reasons we're going to talk about in a minute farther down this timeline, it seems to be really, really, really unlikely that that's going to be the case. And as you can see here at the bottom, looming, I'm going to call it onerously down there, is a January 1, 24 cutoff where you have to have the coverage to qualify for an opt-out. So they're making it pretty clear. They're making noise that makes it obvious that that look-back shutout thing is something they're really looking at. Okay, so now the preliminary actuarial report was made available to the task force about a month ago, about 5 weeks ago. All right, and the update for that is going to be, the deadline for that is August 24th. So that's 5 weeks forward. One of them was 5 weeks back. One of them is 5 weeks forward. And then that actuarial report, which is basically what it's going to have to cost to work. The draft presentation of that is in September. The final presentation is December. Reading the tea leaves there, that's going to set the stage for the legislature to have models and pricing for those models moving forward. So given what we know about budgeting and things like that in California, it would seem as though that sets the stage for something to happen in 24 with regard to legislation. Basically, you got a 2-month time frame between December, when the final report is presented, and the deadline to have bills introduced into the legislature. Plenty of time for career legislative folks and their staff and committees and things like this to put this thing together. So if this piece right here holds true and they stick with that between now, basically, and November 15th, because you do have to allow about 6 weeks to make it through underwriting and processing and stuff. So we got a 4-month window right now for agents. And we've been talking about this twice earlier this year. We had similar presentations. This piece that we're talking about right this minute isn't something that we're just now introducing. We have been encouraging / nudging / cajoling agents to begin these conversations with clients now, as we talked about a few minutes ago, and we're doing that so that they've got an opportunity to try to help as many people as is possible. And it's not particularly complicated for most of the folks that are on the call and represent themselves as being actively involved in long-term care. This is a matter simply of doing what you're doing, broaden the scope perhaps a little bit, and accelerate your pace of these conversations, okay? Because as we stipulated at the beginning, we don't really have that final detail piece, but we know this piece right here looms. And if the collective we, the royal we, if you will, if we wait for this and we wait into 2024, there's a significant chance that a lot of people that are in your client base as agents in California and in your orbit as people that you know and people that know who you are and what you do, a lot of those people are going to be impacted. And one of the things we talked about before, Stephen, was the idea that there's a million reasons to do this, and states are stepping forward. California is going forward. So talk just a little bit about agents kind of finding that motivation to really get moving with this.
Well, I think, as you say, I think the timing is now and then for the next, handful of months. In California, it could be as short as January 1st of next year. But, I think in looking at, and we don't know specifically what proposal California's going to come up with. The actuaries are still looking at it. We can kind of, you can make some guesses that maybe they're going to throw out the skinny down one and the most expensive one. They're going to pick one of the others is probably the most likely, but we don't really know yet. But really taking a look at any of those proposals, none of them are going to provide the needed care that your clients need. And if they do, one of them, I think the maximum pool is 144,000. So if you bought 144,000 lifetime pool, the one that they're proposing is going to cost a whole lot more than if you bought it, just on your own. So, because I got to think to do that one, I'm not sure what tax rate they're looking at, but I don't know that they could do that on 0.58. That's a whole lot more in the way of benefits. So, it's probably going to cost more than just buying private long-term care would cost. So, I think that's, as far as motivation, like you say, it's like, as Mike had said, this isn't anything that you're not already doing. You're probably, you're already doing this. It's just, for those people who say, yeah, that's a good idea, I should think about that someday. Well, that someday really is today. We're kind of there. Now is really the time to do this for a variety of reasons. It's good. It's a good thing to do, number one, but number two, there may be a time frame where you're not going to be able to do this and get the exemption. You can still do it, but you'd have the payroll tax and this at that point. So, maybe there's a time frame where it's important to do this sooner versus later.
Yeah, all true. And the other thing to remember too is typically when you have a deadline of some type or kind, that deadline doesn't start out to be 5-6 months down the road.
No.
Okay, so yeah, it's there, but you got 4 months to have these conversations with folks.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be candid with them and just point out to them that a lot of people to talk to, and you want to make sure that they've got the opportunity to get together with you, the agent, get questions answered, et cetera, and make an informed decision going forward with it. It's important to note that we don't know what that tax rate is going to be for California yet. We've been very clear about that, so we don't have that number. All right, but the easiest way to get around that number is just to have a conversation with them now and work on some basics, if you will, and have a conversation that's meaningful about benefits that are meaningful. And we're getting some other questions coming in about who's going to be subject to this. The mechanism that Washington put in place, and we feel, this is one of those deals where it's going to be a little bit of monkey see, monkey do. The mechanism that Washington's put in place required employment security to be involved with this. And so that meant it was only W-2 employees. Getting the 1099 folks into this requires self-reporting, and that creates a whole new level of headaches. There is no approved collateral material that's available because any collateral would have to be approved by the state, okay? Pieces like you've got right here, which is the summary of the program designs, that's available on the website, the DOI website, and the website for the task force. All of these different things are available out there. And as we said at the beginning, the truth is that there's a lot that's not contained in what we've got here, but we don't have any choice but to work with that. All right. Like I said, people can come up with a lot of reasons to not do something. Oh, I don't know about this and I don't know about that. I was on the phone with a California agent a couple of days ago, just throwing an absolute fit about how angry they were about this. But it's like, okay, when they got done with having the nutty, it didn't change anything. It's still there. Okay. Right. And that agent's clients and prospects, and we're going to talk about your individual circle here in a second, but that agent's clients and prospects are still going to be subject to this no matter how angry they are and whether they agree with it or disagree with it. But remember, for the older agents, guys like me with grandkids, this is about whether the state that you're, these various states, whether they're going to be solvent in 10 or 15 or 20 years, because long-term care costs associated with Medicaid are going to be, let's just be diplomatic and say it's going to be highly problematic, okay? Yeah. So now, a couple times I've touched on this idea of your personal circle, if you will, your orbit, all right? Because a lot of agents are highly, highly reliant on leads, okay? Simple truth of the matter is that people that you know through going to church or through playing golf or playing cards, people in your neighborhood that you go to neighborhood barbecues with, or if you've got kids in high school, whatever, any of the different people that fit into your orbit in these different groups, they know who you are, okay? They probably know some version of what you do, all right? The simple truth is they're more surprised that you haven't approached them about what you do than they are, or they would be if you did approach them about what you do. And by initiating that conversation, it's real basic. Hey, we got a payroll tax coming at us. You're a W-2 employee, as I understand it, Fred. And I want to talk with you and Wilma a little bit about how that's going to affect you, the two of you who are both W-2 employees, as we go forward, and then see if we can come up with a way to keep you from having to pay that payroll tax. Okay, Fred and Wilma are not currently clients of your agency there in Bedrock, but they know who you are and they know what you do. So not going to be really overly surprised if you do that. And as we talked about before, the time to do this for California, the time to do this for New York is right now. Runway's wide open. You have not so much of a deadline, but you've got a defined time frame, and there are going to be more states stepping forward. So and you talked about this when we were prepping for this a little bit, Stephen, now's the time to start thinking about getting stuff done.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because I think a lot of the states, other than say California and New York, that are more, I guess we know a little more about where they're headed. A lot of the kind of the next tier of states that are likely to put something like this forward, I think are watching Washington, and as things move here, and then maybe they'll start watching California if California is the next to go. But I think they're watching to see how it rolls out, and to the extent it rolls out okay, I think a bunch of them are going to step forward with their own proposals.
Yes, and the opt-out, shutout we coined that phrase, so you can we'll copyright that hurriedly after we get done here today. But if the opt-out, shutout concept gets put into play in California, other states are going to pick that up in a hurry. Okay,
Right.
because for reasons that I don't think an actuary, well, we should have probably got an actuary on the phone if we could have found one awake, but for reasons that I don't think actuaries would understand, Washington, particularly Vegty and his crew, they're obsessed with the fact that the people that opted out made a bad decision. And they're obsessed with the fact that there were 500,000 people that they didn't get revenue on into their little operation. But if you look at cost benefit analysis and things like that, there is zero scenario where private long-term care isn't a better way to go, frankly, for the state, for anybody who will buy it, and for the individuals involved. So again, we keep coming back to, to now's the time with this. So we've handled a few questions here. We got about 5 minutes to take questions. We don't want to get into hypotheticals. If you have an overview question, we would be glad to entertain that. The marketing guys are going to be calling everybody that's on the call here later today to answer other questions. But keep in mind, we admitted this at the beginning, there's a lot of detail stuff we don't know right now. The one detail thing that we do know is people need to start acting on this. That waiting is only going to create more problems. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute. As I tell everybody when I do this, please make sure if you don't have a question to mute yourself so that we don't have tea kettles whistling and dogs barking and the Amazon guy ringing the doorbell and whatever else, or somebody making a sales call on their cell phone while they're doing this on a landline, whatever it is. So we don't have that stuff interrupting, and that way we give everybody the opportunity to be able to hear this. So we're going to unmute all the attendees. I know a lot of you folks have muted yourselves. Anybody with, I'm going to call it generalized questions that we can field here, and we got a hard stop at we're going to call it 9:47. So we got about 5 minutes for questions. So anybody with questions, go ahead and pipe up. You've all got the ability to unmute yourself.
I don't see inflation on this. Is there inflation included?
Don't know.
Don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
Not built yet. But when you're selling policies, either sell a high benefit as a front load or put 3% compound inflation on there. Problem with the don't know thing is we also don't have a lot of time. We have to make some command decisions moving forward. If it turns out you sell somebody a policy for $5,000 with a $5,000 monthly benefit in a pool of 180, and what California does comes back less as far as the exemption, and if they really want to, and the inflation, they can drop that coverage off. And trust me, the carrier is not going to complain about people taking steps to minimize their exposure. All right. So the big thing is just to have the conversations. So,
yeah.
All right. Anybody else?
Well, I think, and Mike, just one thought on inflation. That one of the things I know, state of Washington is looking at adding that. I haven't heard that they have, passed that or anything yet. But I think that's part of watching Washington. I think a lot of the states are going to see what happens with that, and probably follow suit. I got to think it's going to dawn on them dawn on all of them at some point that we're going to need to do something about inflation, because that's, you're looking 20, 30 years out. These numbers are, they're bad enough now. They're going to be even worse going forward.
What Steve's talking about is Washington is looking. It's a separate mechanism in Washington's laws to put a growth element on something like this. And so there was actually, I think we categorize it as a referendum on the ballot in 22 to allow them to invest this money to allow it to grow. The public led themselves to believe that by voting no, that they were killing the tax, which didn't work that way. So they didn't kill the tax, but they killed their ability to put money into, invest it somewhere and to generate something that would allow these accounts to grow. But if you're concerned about that when you're working with your clients, by all means, put inflation on the policy. It's not it's not a bad thing at all. So, all right, anybody else with questions out there? All right. Well, we did answer a bunch before in writing, and some of the stuff I just threw into what we were doing. So we're going to go ahead and call that here a couple minutes early, give everybody a little bit of their time back and their day back. So we appreciate y'all being here. As I said before, appreciate Steve and Amanda making their time available here with us as well this morning. Hopefully you folks understand the opportunity that's there. You understand that we've got a limited window, but the runway's open right now, so you do have the ability to start having these conversations and moving forward with folks. So based on the volumes that people did in Washington, it's going to be a great opportunity for you to grow or expand your business and your book of business. And it's going to be a great opportunity to put policies on the books with young people who normally would not pay any attention to a conversation about long-term care. Young, healthy people who are going to pay those renewal premiums for a long time. Trust me when I tell you, there are worse opportunities to have than that. So yes. So, all right. Well, we're going to go ahead and close it out then. Thanks, everybody. Courtney, thank you. Courtney will process the recording, get it uploaded to the website later today. And as I said, the marketing folks, Derek, Don, myself, will be following up with you later today for any other questions that you've got. So thanks, everybody. Steve, Amanda, thank you again. We're going to go ahead and call this. Thanks. Take care. Bye now.
Mike.